The early days of the Pacific War presented an unprecedented military problem: how to successfully land a massive army onto a hostile beach against entrenched enemy forces. The sheer logistical scale of this endeavor was staggering, demanding coordination between naval transport, air cover, and ground forces that had never been achieved before. Initial attempts by American forces to execute these complex amphibious assaults were often clumsy, slow, and devastatingly costly in terms of lives and equipment. The United States Navy lacked a dedicated, purpose-built vessel capable of rapidly delivering both men and heavy equipment directly onto unimproved shores. Existing naval doctrine favored cumbersome methods like transferring troops from large transports to small boats far offshore, a process fraught with peril and delay. These early landing crafts were frequently ill-suited to the shallow waters, often getting stuck on coral reefs or sandbars well before reaching the actual beachhead. The high sides of the older, slower boats exposed the vulnerable troops to merciless enemy fire as they were forced to climb over the sides and wade ashore. Such failures were not merely tactical setbacks, they represented a fundamental breakdown in the ability of the American military to project power across vast oceanic distances. The very concept of a successful large-scale amphibious invasion seemed deeply flawed to many military observers across the world. This early frustration fueled a search for a revolutionary solution, one that would redefine the geometry of beach warfare and turn the tide of the Pacific conflict. The technological limitations were a clear and present danger to the entire Allied strategy in the Pacific theater. It became painfully obvious that victory would depend on an unsung, humble vessel, an efficient connector between the sea and the shore. The successful prosecution of the war hinged on conquering the final few hundred yards of water, an area that had proven to be a death trap for so many brave men. The need for a game-changing piece of equipment was immediate and critical to the unfolding strategy of island hopping toward the Japanese homeland. America's industrial might was called upon to solve this maritime riddle, a challenge born of desperation and strategic necessity. The path to Tokyo was paved with countless beaches, and each one required a swift and decisive landing capability that simply did not yet exist. This initial period of struggle highlighted the arrogance of an established military mindset that had failed to innovate sufficiently for the modern global war. The lessons learned in Blood on the Beaches of North Africa and the initial Pacific battles were harsh but absolutely necessary for eventual success. A new vessel was needed to shield the men, carry the load, and, most importantly, deliver them right to the heart of the enemy's prepared defenses. The answer would eventually be found not in the halls of naval bureaucracy but in the workshops of a tenacious boatbuilder from New Orleans. The officers of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy viewed the early American attempts at amphibious landings with open derision and professional contempt. They considered the American methods unrefined, slow, and overly reliant on inefficient, large transports that were easy targets for their well-positioned coastal guns. Japan, an island nation, had its own sophisticated traditions of naval and coastal defense, which fostered a dangerous sense of superiority regarding their fixed defenses. Their tactical doctrine was built on the confidence that they could destroy any landing force before it could establish a viable foothold. Japanese engineers and troops meticulously designed and constructed formidable, integrated defenses across their captured island territories throughout the Pacific. These island fortresses featured interlocking fields of fire from concrete pillboxes, hidden machine gun nests, and extensive networks of underground tunnels and bunkers. The beaches themselves were often heavily mined and shielded by natural obstacles like razor-sharp coral reefs, which they correctly predicted would snag early American vessels. Japanese intelligence noted the painfully slow process of offloading men and supplies from the high-sided landing boats used in the early campaigns. This observation led them to believe that they had a massive window of opportunity to counterattack and destroy any disorganized landing force piecemeal. They often referred to the American landings with mocking terms, confident that the logistics of landing an industrial army were beyond the capacity of their enemy. This overconfidence was a critical psychological error, blinding them to the potential for rapid technological innovation from the American industrial base. Their strategic focus remained fixed on conventional naval battles and air superiority, underestimating the ground war's dependence on secure supply lines immediately following a landing. The Japanese High Command believed their outermost defense perimeter, the ring of island bases, was virtually impregnable against a coordinated amphibious assault. Each island was intended to be a fortress, a symbol of the emperor's unwavering will, meant to be held to the very last man. This defensive philosophy relied heavily on the predictability and slowness of the enemy's invasion method, a predictability they grew to rely upon. They saw the high loss of life among the exposed American troops as proof of their own tactical genius and the futility of the American strategy. The Pacific Ocean's vastness seemed to be another layer of defense, ensuring that any invading force would arrive exhausted, disorganized, and short on vital supplies. The mockery, therefore, was rooted in a genuine assessment of American weakness in the critical realm of beach assault technology. Their laughter would soon be silenced by a simple, shallow draft boat that would shatter their carefully constructed illusion of an unbreakable coastal defense. The very thing they mocked would become the engine of their eventual and complete destruction across the Pacific theater. The American military's pre-war concept of beach landings was woefully inadequate for the realities of the Pacific and European theaters of operation. Before the widespread adoption of the Higgins boat, the United States relied on existing commercial and naval designs that proved disastrously ineffective. One primary issue was the draft of the vessels, which were often too deep to navigate the shallow, reef-strewn waters common around the Pacific Islands. When these boats inevitably grounded hundreds of yards from the shore, the soldiers were forced to disembark into deep water, often losing their rifles and radios. The heavy equipment, including artillery and early tanks, could not be readily offloaded, severely hamstringing the firepower of the initial beach assault teams. In a horrifying sequence, some early landing operations saw men attempting to carry crucial supplies through the surf, becoming easy targets for concealed snipers and machine guns. The high gunnels of the boats, intended for seaworthiness, ironically trapped the soldiers inside as they were subjected to withering crossfire during the final approach. The time it took to unload a single boat was a tactical eternity under fire, allowing the defenders to reposition and concentrate their efforts against the disorganized troops. A notorious example was the disaster at Tarawa, where numerous landing craft were impaled on the unforgiving coral reefs, forcing Marines to wade an agonizingly long distance. This meant the vital surprise element of an amphibious assault was completely lost, replaced by a slow, predictable, and costly crawl to the shore. The lack of a front opening ramp meant that men and materials had to be taken over the side, slowing the tempo of the attack to a crawl. Engineers struggled to create temporary piers and causeways under intense bombardment, further delaying the establishment of a secure beachhead. The losses in the early invasions directly correlated with the inability of the existing equipment to overcome the natural and man-made obstacles of the landing zone. These early failures served as a brutal, unmistakable signal to the military planners that an entirely new approach to amphibious warfare was absolutely required. The lives of thousands of soldiers and the success of the entire war effort were dependent on solving this logistical and technological bottleneck. The mocking laughter of the Japanese was an echoing reality of the technical shortcomings plaguing the American advance. The critical lesson was that an effective landing craft needed to be rugged, shallow draft, easily maneuverable, and capable of rapid discharge. These early, heartbreaking attempts became the stark, bloody blueprint for the revolutionary design that was about to emerge. The logistical crisis demanded a solution that was simple, mass-producible, and completely focused on the soldier's perspective in the heat of battle. The man who would change the face of modern warfare was not a naval architect with a pedigree from Annapolis but an eccentric, self-made boat builder from New Orleans named Andrew Jackson Higgins. Higgins possessed a volatile blend of engineering genius, relentless drive, and a unique willingness to disregard established nautical conventions. His company, Higgins Industries, was originally renowned for constructing specialized, shallow-draft workboats designed to navigate the intricate bayous and swamps of Louisiana. These early boats were used by oil prospectors, trappers, and loggers, all of whom required a tough, stable vessel that could run right up onto a muddy bank. Higgins had a deep understanding of hydrodynamics and the specific needs of operating a boat in treacherous, shallow-water environments. He famously once declared that he never wanted to build a boat that couldn't carry its owner right up to his front door, a principle that would later define his contribution to the war. When the U.S. military began searching for an improved landing craft, they initially turned to their own naval designers, who produced various inadequate and overly complex designs. Higgins, seeing the flaws in the official models, submitted one of his own commercial designs, a motorboat called the Eureka, which immediately stood out. The Eureka boat was already noted for its innovative hull shape, which provided stability and speed while allowing for an extremely shallow draft. It was this existing design that served as the foundational platform for what would eventually become the iconic landing craft, vehicle, personnel, or LCVP. Higgins was a passionate, charismatic figure who clashed constantly with military bureaucracy, often bypassing official channels to push his superior design forward. He famously mobilized his non-union workforce into a production juggernaut, turning out boats at a rate the official shipyards could not comprehend or match. His factory was a model of wartime efficiency and speed, employing women and minorities and demonstrating a remarkable ability to mass-produce complex vessels. The military brass was hesitant to trust a maverick civilian builder, but the desperate realities of the war quickly superseded institutional prejudice. Higgins's vision was simple, a ramped boat that would be a disposable piece of equipment, built for one purpose, to deliver fighting men and their gear. His singular focus on function over traditional form produced a vessel that was rugged, easily repaired, and perfectly adapted for the conditions of a beach assault. His dedication to the soldiers was legendary, insisting on a design that minimized their exposure to enemy fire during the most dangerous moment of the invasion. The adoption of the Higgins design marked a turning point where military necessity finally trumped the slow, rigid processes of the official naval establishment. The transition of the civilian Eureka boat into the military landing craft, vehicle, personnel was a masterpiece of rapid wartime re-engineering. The most profound modification was the addition of a robust, heavy ramp at the bow, a feature that completely revolutionized the concept of a landing craft. This simple yet groundbreaking feature allowed troops and light vehicles to exit directly onto the beach within seconds, eliminating the dangerous and slow process of climbing over the sides. The ramp was protected by armor plating, offering a measure of security for the men packed tightly inside the main compartment during the approach. Higgins maintained the boat's signature shallow draft hull, which was key to its ability to run past the offshore obstacles that had doomed its predecessors. The boat was constructed primarily from marine plywood and steel, making it incredibly resilient to damage yet relatively cheap and fast to manufacture. Its standard size was roughly 36 feet long, capable of carrying a massive payload of either 36 combat-equipped men or a jeep and 12 troops, or 8,000 pounds of cargo. A single motor, typically a grey marine diesel or a Hall-Scott gasoline engine, provided enough power to navigate the surf and retract quickly from the beach. The LCVP was designed for high maneuverability in the tight confines of a crowded invasion beach, a necessary attribute for avoiding underwater mines and congestion. The small, elevated cockpit protected the coxswain while still allowing excellent visibility, a crucial factor when navigating through smoke and explosions. The sheer mass production capability of Higgins's yards was as important as the design itself, ensuring a steady, overwhelming supply of these critical vessels. He established factories far inland to maintain production even in the face of potential coastal attacks, a strategic decision that kept the boats flowing. The process of training crews to operate the LCVP was remarkably brief, a testament to the boat's straightforward and rugged operation. This simplicity allowed for a rapid expansion of the amphibious fleet, as thousands of sailors and coast guardsmen were quickly certified as coxswains. The final military designation, the LCVP, became synonymous with the beach invasions of the entire war, a generic term for the very instrument of victory. The design was so perfectly balanced between capacity, speed, and draft that it became the undisputed standard for all future amphibious operations. Its low profile in the water made it a difficult target for distant enemy gunners compared to the larger, bulkier transports. The swamp boat had been transformed into the essential workhorse of the Allied invasion strategy, ready to carry the future of the war onto the enemy's shores. The ramp of the Higgins boat was far more than a mere mechanical convenience, it was a psychological and tactical breakthrough that redefined the art of invasion. Before the ramp, a soldier's moment of disembarkation was a paralyzing bottleneck, a point of maximum vulnerability and disorganization under fire. The dropping of the ramp instantly transformed the boat from a shielded transport into a dynamic, offensive gateway to the battlefield. It allowed the initial wave of infantry to burst out in a coordinated line, rapidly dispersing across the sand to establish a defensive perimeter. This sudden, synchronized surge of troops greatly reduced the amount of time they were exposed while wading through the deadly shallows. For the first time, light vehicles like jeeps and crucial supplies like ammunition and medical kits could be driven directly onto the beach, immediately supporting the forward troops. The ramp enabled a dramatically quicker turnaround time for the vessel, allowing the LCVP to retract and return for another load, maintaining the necessary tempo of the assault. The speed of offloading was critical, preventing the massive congestion of boats that had hampered earlier, failed landing attempts. A ramp that could be dropped in seconds meant the vessel could spend less time stationary and exposed to the enemy's coastal artillery fire. The psychological impact on the troops was enormous, replacing the fear of a confused, clumsy disembarkation with the clarity of a direct charge. Soldiers could approach the shore knowing that their landing would be quick, efficient, and immediately supported by the necessary supplies. The material used for the ramp was strong enough to withstand the abuse of countless landings on various terrains, from soft sand to jagged coral. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most revolutionary military innovation is one that simplifies a previously complex, deadly task. The ramp effectively shrank the size of the Pacific Ocean for the Allied forces, removing the final, most dangerous barrier to Japanese-held territory. Its design was so effective that it was immediately copied and integrated into nearly all future landing craft, becoming a universal symbol of the invasion effort. The entire structure of the LCVP was a functional shell built around the utility of this single, hinged piece of steel and wood at the bow. The true strategic brilliance of the Higgins boat lay in its unparalleled capacity for mass production and its simple integration into the vast Allied war machine. Andrew Higgins and his company delivered an astounding number of these landing crafts, totaling over 20,000 units by the end of the war. This production volume was a clear expression of American industrial superiority and completely overwhelmed the Japanese defensive capacity. The boats were built in assembly line fashion, much like Henry Ford's cars, utilizing standardized parts and non-traditional labor forces to accelerate output. Higgins Industries became a sprawling network of boatyards and factories, working around the clock to meet the insatiable demands of the global conflict. The construction materials, primarily wood and steel, were readily available, preventing the production line from being bottlenecked by strategic material shortages. This massive and rapid flow of LCVPs meant that military planners could treat the vessels as expendable assets in the deadly business of beach assault. If a boat was destroyed or damaged on a reef, another was always immediately available to take its place in the endless stream of transports. The sheer numbers of Higgins boats allowed for the simultaneous execution of multiple, massive amphibious invasions across various theaters of war. The Allies were no longer restricted by the limitations of their landing fleet, but only by the total number of troops and supplies they could muster. Each LCVP functioned as a vital, high-speed connector between the massive, unmoving transports offshore and the precarious, contested strip of sand on the beach. This logistical chain was critical to the successful establishment of stable beachheads that could transition into forward operating bases. The boat's ability to carry both personnel and light equipment, like anti-tank guns and medical teams, made it incredibly versatile and indispensable. The continuous, overwhelming arrival of men and materials broke the Japanese defensive strategy, which relied on the quick annihilation of a weak, initial force. This flood of resources demonstrated the power of American manufacturing to turn the tide of battle through sheer volume and organizational efficiency. The early campaigns in the Solomon Islands, particularly the landing on Guadalcanal, served as the definitive, brutal proving ground for the Higgins boat. These invasions represented the first time the LCVP was used in truly mass numbers, facing the intense and determined resistance of the Japanese forces. The jungles and beaches of Guadalcanal were a horrifying mix of swamps, dense foliage, and rough, unpredictable surf conditions. The Higgins boats performed admirably, proving their ruggedness against the unexpected obstacles of the tropical environment. The ability of the boats to run right up onto the rough shingle beaches and rapidly discharge their troops was immediately recognized as a game-changer by the field commanders. The swiftness of the offload allowed American forces to pour men onto the beachhead faster than the Japanese could organize a concerted counterattack. This rapid build-up of force was crucial in securing the initial perimeter, a necessity for holding the newly gained ground against fierce Japanese banzai charges. The LCVP crews, often men of the Coast Guard, demonstrated remarkable bravery and skill, navigating the treacherous waters under constant aerial and shore bombardment. The boats were not merely transports, they became symbols of resilience, returning again and again to the beach to bring more men and vital supplies. Logistical officers realized that the flow of supplies was now a controlled stream rather than a sputtering trickle, a massive improvement over earlier attempts. The Japanese, for the first time, were genuinely surprised by the relentless, overwhelming tempo of the American landings. Their traditional defensive strategy of focusing fire on the slower, larger vessels was suddenly rendered ineffective by the countless small, quick Higgins boats. The sight of the bow ramps dropping and disgorging endless waves of Marines had a profound psychological effect on the entrenched defenders. The brutal fighting in the Solomons confirmed that the LCVP was the essential enabler of the new island-hopping strategy. It demonstrated that the Allies could now successfully initiate and sustain large-scale invasions anywhere in the world where a beach existed. The boats successfully navigated the difficult coral and sand of the islands, validating Andrew Higgins's core design philosophy for shallow water operations. The introduction of the Higgins boat fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the war for both the American attacker and the Japanese defender. For the American soldier, the LCVP offered a renewed sense of confidence and a concrete promise of efficiency in the face of near-certain danger. They knew the boat was purpose-built for their survival, designed to spend the least amount of time possible in the enemy's kill zone. The ramp provided a clear, defined point of action, replacing the terrifying confusion of climbing over a ship's side with a clear path to the fight. This increased morale contributed to a more aggressive and determined assault force, which had a direct impact on the tactical outcome of the landings. For the Japanese, the change was one of a devastating and unexpected disillusionment, realizing their earlier contempt was fatally misplaced. They had based their defenses on the assumption of a clumsy, slow, unpredictable enemy landing, an assumption that was now utterly shattered. The relentless and endless waves of Higgins boats represented a new, terrifying form of warfare, a logistical sledgehammer. The sheer volume of men and material that could be poured onto a beach in a short period completely overwhelmed their defensive planning. The defenders were no longer fighting a disorganized trickle of men, but a fully supported, rapidly expanding beachhead. The sight of the bow ramps dropping became a chilling precursor to a massive enemy presence that could no longer be contained or destroyed quickly. This psychological blow led to a breakdown in morale and an increasing sense of futility among the Japanese forces ordered to hold the line. The Higgins boat effectively turned the tables, making the defenders the ones trapped and exposed while the invaders gained rapid momentum. It transformed the American image from one of a cumbersome attacker to that of an unstoppable, industrial engine of war. The psychological shift was crucial in maintaining the aggressive momentum of the American forces as they pressed forward across the Pacific. The influence of the Higgins boat was not confined to the Pacific theater, it was the indispensable vehicle that made the D-Day landings in Normandy possible. Tens of thousands of LCVPs were ultimately used to ferry the Allied forces onto the 5 heavily fortified beaches of the French coast on June 6, 1944. President Eisenhower himself credited Andrew Higgins with the success of the Normandy invasion, recognizing the absolute necessity of the boat's design. The European theater presented different challenges, including rougher seas and massive concrete obstacles, yet the LCVP performed its duty flawlessly. The boat's rugged design allowed it to successfully operate in the choppy, cold waters of the English Channel, proving its seaworthiness far from its Louisiana swamps. The ability to rapidly discharge men and essential supplies was the critical factor in establishing the 5 separate beachheads against overwhelming German resistance. The speed of the LCVP helped mitigate the deadly crossfire from the German WN sites, allowing troops to get off the open sand quickly. The boats delivered everything from medical teams and engineers to ammunition and communication equipment, sustaining the battle from the very first hour. Without the Higgins boat, the scale and coordination of the D-Day operation would have been logistically impossible to achieve. Its proven track record in the Pacific provided Allied commanders with the necessary confidence to execute the largest amphibious invasion in history. The LCVP became a truly global icon of the Allied war effort, recognized on every front where the Allies faced an enemy protected by a coastline. The boat's presence on all major invasion beaches, from the South Pacific to the Mediterranean and the English Channel, solidified its legendary status. It was a perfect example of a single, simple, and effective invention that solved a global military problem with universal applicability. The ubiquitous nature of the Higgins boat on D-Day demonstrated that American industrial genius had supplied the tool necessary for ultimate victory in both major theaters. Its simple, effective design proved resilient across every imaginable environment and military challenge thrown its way. The ultimate silence of the Japanese officers' mockery was paid for in lost territory, shattered defenses, and the eventual, inevitable defeat of their armies. Their initial confidence, based on the inadequacies of early landing craft, was systematically eroded with every successful American invasion. The swiftness and sheer scale of the landings on islands like Saipan, Guam, and Iwo Jima proved that the American amphibious capability was now a force of unstoppable momentum. The Japanese had no counter-technology to match the LCVP's efficiency. They were left with only the grim, final recourse of fighting to the death on their beaches. They were forced to commit their valuable reserves to immediate, costly counterattacks rather than strategically delaying the American advance. The Higgins boat forced them to constantly re-evaluate their coastal defense strategies, all of which proved insufficient against the endless stream of incoming firepower. The boat fundamentally altered the tactical equation, turning the vast Pacific into a highway for American forces rather than a defensive moat for Japan. The mockery turned to frustration, then to disbelief, and finally to a desperate, cold realization that they had fatally underestimated their enemy's capacity for innovation. The LCVP became the physical manifestation of the American ability to overcome any logistical challenge with simple, mass-produced genius. Every ramp drop was a symbol of the failure of the Japanese High Command to properly prepare for a truly effective beach assault. The end result was the complete erosion of the Japanese defensive perimeter, island by island, until the American forces stood at the very doorstep of the home islands. The Higgins boat had effectively robbed the Japanese of their most valuable asset, the time needed to fortify and repel an invasion. The vessel's success was a powerful lesson in the importance of engineering and logistics as core components of modern warfare strategy. The Higgins boat, the unglamorous workhorse of the Second World War, has secured its place as one of the most critical and impactful military inventions in history. It is a machine whose simple design directly saved countless lives by dramatically reducing the time soldiers spent exposed on the deadly approach to the beach. The LCVP remains the enduring symbol of the Allied triumph in amphibious warfare, a direct ancestor to every modern landing craft used today. Andrew Jackson Higgins, its volatile and brilliant creator, was rightfully recognized by many as the man who won the war for the Allies. The boat's design was so foundational that its principles of a shallow draft, high capacity, and a bow ramp are still universally applied by navies across the globe. Veterans of the war universally recall the sight and sound of the Higgins boat ramp dropping as the defining moment of their combat experience. It was a machine of necessity, born from the urgent demand to solve a critical military problem under the immense pressure of global conflict. The very name Higgins boat is now synonymous with invasion, a testament to the power of a single design to change the course of history. The simple wooden hulls, once mass-produced in New Orleans, are now prized museum pieces, silent witnesses to the largest military operations ever conceived. The legacy of the LCVP is a reminder that the most significant technological breakthroughs often come not from complex, expensive weaponry, but from solutions to basic logistical hurdles. It embodies the spirit of American ingenuity and the ability of a civilian industrialist to provide the military with exactly what they needed, regardless of naval tradition. The boat continues to represent the moment when the Allies finally conquered the final, most deadly obstacle of the invasion, the last few yards of water. Its shadow stretches over every beachhead secured by the Allies, from the tiny islands of the Pacific to the vast expanse of the Normandy coast. The humble LCVP, mocked by the enemy, ultimately ruled the waves and delivered the decisive tool for global victory. Its story is one of innovation, production, and the triumph of practical design over military dogma.